You are now leading this extraordinarily big company. How do you think of yourself as a leader now? How did you think about your role on the inspiration side as a leader? This is a really important time. How do you deal with that?
Welcome to No Turning Back, a podcast hosted by General Stan McChrystal and myself, Chris Fussell. Our goal here is simple: to have serious conversations with serious leaders so that we can learn from the best and navigate these complex times together. Thanks for joining us. Hey everyone, excited to have you here for the last episode of No Turning Back for what has been obviously just a crazy year for all of us. And so Stan and I couldn't be more excited to have a pretty special guest on today, Simon Sinek, who's been a friend of ours for years in different capacities. Many of you will be very familiar with Simon's work from his breakthrough book, Start With Why, that came out nearly a decade back, and several follow-on books since that time. Leaders Eat Last, The Infinite Game, just a series of thoughtful books and follow-on writings and engagements throughout industry that have made Simon sort of a household name for industry leaders who are trying to think through what's the purpose and points of connection with my organization and the folks inside the building, the folks that work for us and have given so much of their time and life to representing this brand and what is we're trying to bring to the market, and their purpose in the market. You know, why do we exist for those that want to leverage our service, whether it's a product, an airline, a professional service, whatever the case may be. You know, and Simon is one of those just unique thinkers who was, I would argue, many years ahead of his time when it came to recognizing the shift that was taking place around the world, going back 10, 15 years, a recognition that the best brands that were coming into being as we all shifted into the information age and this sense of interconnectedness that is now considered a sort of commonplace understanding. What was that going to do to our emotional connection around brands? And so this is a great discussion with a thought leader in that space, and I would argue the thought leader that really changed many of our thinking about how we had to connect the sense of a purpose, our sense of why, to what it is we were actually dedicating our lives to. And just on a very personal note, I mean, Simon's been a great friend to other members of the military and the military more broadly since I've known him, and a lot of which we don't get into that in great detail today. But he is, for those of you who don't know, a huge ally of the military, helping military leaders also think through what that looks like for the organization, and what it looks like, more importantly, or equally importantly, to the sense of the mission. What are the cultural norms of the military that allow individual members to remain cohesive with one another, and then also maintain a deep sense of belief in what can be incredibly challenging operations. And if you've read his work or have listened to him speak over the years, you'll often hear military analogies, all of which are heartfelt and true. And I say that because I know personally the relationships that Simon has invested in with military leaders to try to understand that culture. And shares it in a way in his writings so that others can learn from it. So this is a conversation we've both been looking forward to for quite a while, and one that we both really enjoyed. And Simon's one of those people that you could talk for hours, but we try to get to some key points here around leadership that I think many of you will benefit from. And I can't imagine a better way to close out 2020 than having a conversation with a good friend who is one of the most genuine optimists. And I don't, as you also know from if you understand Simon's work, not optimism in a Pollyannish, everything's going to be okay way, but an optimist in the sense of a continued focus and belief in the greater mission and the better parts of humanity will get us through any sort of trying times. So just the perfect person to wrap up what's been just an insane year for all of us. Hope you enjoy this. Thanks for tuning in.
Perfect. Hey, Simon, besides being a friend and just enjoying talking to you, let me tell you why we were excited to have you on today. Because for most of my life, I've been really interested in why people do things, why soldiers serve, why other people do that. And of course, you've become literally an authority on purpose. Now, I know why soldiers and SEALs serve on the battlefield, and I can even understand why healthcare workers feel really good about their sense of purpose now. What do leaders in other less obvious industries or walks of life, how do leaders connect to their teams when that direct linkage to purpose may not be so evident?
What's so interesting is it doesn't really matter what the industry is. Service is the same. Service is to other human beings, always. It's not serving abstract shareholders. It's not serving, some abstract sort of offering value. But when you can perceive a human being on the receiving end of your effort, that is what gives our lives and our work meaning. And very often when work becomes abstract, or the impact of our work becomes abstract, that's when we start to lose connection with any sense of service. It becomes less fulfilling for us. It becomes just about the rat race, just about the next promotion, just about the next payout, and it even becomes less sort of inspiring, quite frankly. There's been some good research done on reconnecting human beings with the impact of their work. I had a personal experience. I went out to RAF Mildenhall to visit the US Air Force out there in England. And they took a senior maintainer off the line to drive me around and take care of me for the day. One of the things they had in store for me was to fly the KC-135 sim, which was totally fun to fly this simulator for a big tanker. And I had my fun. But one of the things I did is I invited the maintainer to come into the sim with me. He'd never stepped foot in a simulator in his whole career. He's been in the Air Force for 25 years. And after I had my fun, we put him in the left seat. And we had a flight instructor with us, and we let him fly around. And we said, "What's your specialty?" And he said, "Electronics." And so in mid-flight, we turned off the electronics. So for the first time in his career, he could actually feel the impact of his work in the life of a pilot. And in 25 years, he'd never had that. And we created these abstract and long chains of logic, where we would tell a young mechanic that your job is to turn this wrench, and turning this wrench keeps the wings on the aircraft, which allows the pilot to fly their mission, allows them to drop their ordnance, and America to advance its policy, and you're protecting freedom and democracy around the world. The problem is when this is your job every day, turning this wrench, it's really hard to connect that with freedom and democracy. There's too many steps. And so by bringing it close in hand for maintainers to physically experience what it feels like, or even to just meet the pilots, to know their names and know that they're serving a human being, has profound impact on how they feel about their jobs and the impact of their work.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. When I had first left the military, I got the opportunity to go down to a very small town in Mississippi where they were building mine-resistant vehicles that were being used in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was amazing because they treated me like a rock star. Here I am, Stan McChrystal, the knucklehead, but because I was a customer of this marvelous vehicle that these people put together with such care, it seems like I became temporarily that connection, that bridge, that personification of the purpose of what they did, really strong.
Yeah, and I mean, look, to quote, we were talking about the American military, and I'm going to quote Joseph Stalin, but what Stalin, it's attributed to Stalin, he said, "The death of one man is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic." And this is so often what we do. We speak in numbers. You're saving the lives of 50,000 people with this vaccine. You're saving the lives of millions of people with this vaccine. You're saving the lives of thousands of people with this this vehicle, et cetera, whatever we do. But rather, it's way more powerful to introduce somebody and tell the story of one individual who has a name and a face. I remember I had the opportunity to go work out with the 82nd Airborne. And, we did something called a heroes workout. And here we are, a bunch of soldiers. Well, they were, I'm not. And the commanding officer pulled out a piece of paper and he said, today we're working out for, and they gave the name of a fallen comrade. It was actually an airman. And none of them had ever met this airman. He's in a completely different force. And yet they told us his name. They told us the circumstances under which he was killed in combat. They told us the name of his family, the name of his wife, the name of his kids, where he came from, where he was raised. They painted a picture of this human being for us. And it was astonishing. I felt it. I'm not a soldier, and yet I felt the same love and devotion for this airman. And here I was, when I wanted to drag because I was getting tired, I picked myself up and pushed even harder because now I was working out for another human being. I wasn't working out for myself. I was working out for this airman. And it was amazing to see the energy of these soldiers. We weren't working out for all the fallen. We were working out for one person with a name and a life. It was incredible.
That's perfect. Yeah. Chris.
Simon, when you building on that a little bit and sort of pivoting it over to the conversation of sort of the intersection of the work you've been doing for years and where we've been focused, when Stan retired from the military and I joined him here at McChrystal Group, and we had this idea of writing a book about those experiences. I'm guessing, like you thought when you started talking about and then writing about the idea of starting with why, you can't, you have a hope, right? But you can't forecast out 10, 15 years and say, this is going to be a real thing, right? So same with Team of Teams. We're like, well, let's capture these lessons for others. And we figured 12 to 18 months, people get tired of it. And here it is almost 10 years later. Why do you think, and there's an intersection between those two concepts that we could talk about in more depth.
For sure.
Why do you think that is? Why is this moment in history so ready for ideas like this?
Well, I think fundamentally, in both of our cases, the stories were true. They were our stories. They weren't, neither of these works were intended as academic or commercial exercises. They were ostensibly a reporting. And they captured very human experiences that other people could relate to. And whether you served in the military or not, the experiences are very relatable. And definitely my work started with the loss of my own passion, which is, regardless of what you've ever done in your life, at some point you've fallen out of love with your own work. And we get nonsense advice: find your bliss, follow your, like, what the hell am I supposed to do with that? And if you're successful, it's embarrassing. So you don't even talk about it. And I think what we did is we aimed to communicate our ideas in the same way we talked about them with our friends. These were ideas that we had both shared for years with our friends because it mattered to us. And our friends benefited from the lessons we were learning, and we learned to better articulate our lessons so that more of our friends would be able to glean the same lessons. And somebody said we should write it down. And we both had opportunities to write it. In our case, it was actually the same publisher who decided to tell us to write down our ideas. And I think the reason so I think that's one reason is that they're inherently relatable and human in their expression. I think the other reason is that we didn't rely on marketing or advertising. Like I said, these weren't commercial enterprises. We simply allowed the works to take on a life of their own. I had the opportunity to attend a luncheon a few years ago, and I was sort of shuffling down the buffet, sort of minding my own business as the introvert that I am. And I happened to be walking, standing next to, putting salad on my plate next to Baz Luhrmann, the director. And so we ended up sitting next to each other for lunch. And I loved how he talked about his work. He said he treats each one of his works like one of his children. Like you invest everything so that this thing can grow up and be the best version of itself possible. And then when it's time, you let them go out into the world and they go and make a life of their own. And then you sort of like go on to the next thing, and they have independence. And he says that's how he thinks about his own work. And so people come up to him and go, "Oh my God, I love Moulin Rouge." And he'll say, "Oh, how is he? I haven't talked to him in ages. Say hi for me the next time you talk to him." His works go on and live a life of their own. And I think that's one of the things that I know definitely for me, which is I invested everything in Start With Why. And when it was done, I moved on to the next project and I allowed it to go live its own life. And I didn't attempt to push it or make it become something. It wasn't I wasn't trying to live my childhood ambitions through this project, but rather it took on a life of its own, which meant it allowed for people to pass it on themselves without any sort of advertising or sort of promotions or anything like that. And I think that's a large part of it, which is we allowed it to just sort of do its own thing.
Simon, this is interesting because we do have the same publisher, and it's been a couple of years. They asked me to go to one of those receptions in New York, and I took my wife. We milled around with a bunch of people. And then at one point I got with the senior leadership of the publishing house. We're just making small talk. And so I said, "Well, who's your best author?" And they go, "Oh, Simon Sinek." And I'm looking at them. I said, "I'm standing right here. You're not supposed to say that in front of me." And they said, "Oh, we love you, but Simon, he really sells a lot of books." But here's the question.
They told me your name when I asked them the same questions.
Yeah, they're probably just trying to poke us.
Yeah.
What is it about an idea or a book that gets traction with people? Because there's an awful lot thrown out there. The vast majority don't get that traction. What is it that does?
Well, a book is still relevant today because you can go to a level of detail that you can't do in a speech. Yeah. I could talk for 3 hours and I'd capture maybe 80 pages. Yeah. And it's not, there's the whole talk about TED Talks replace books. It's not either or, it's both. Yeah. There's a place for summary. There's a place for one-liners, and elevator pitches, and there's a place for rigor. And I think a book, nothing can replace the rigor of a book. It has to be well researched. It has to be logical. Speaking also is very forgiving. You can talk out of order. You can leave things out, and it's all fine. A book can't do that. There's a depth of understanding to an idea that only a book can provide.
Do you think that? I'm sorry, Chris. Do you think that books are losing their rigor now? I know some of the long-form history books maintain it, but do you think that there is much thought going on in books right now?
Well, the problem is, like with so many things, when something becomes a business, where it's not about the rigor, it's about the sale. Yeah. To you and me, the rigor might be important, but to too many publishers, how many books they care more about how many followers we've got. They care about what our marketing efforts are going to be. And the problem is, like anything, which is the competitive nature of the publishing industry means we publish too many books because of the potential for. And so instead of sort of fishing with a line, they're fishing with a net, and they publish so many books, of which very, very few will actually make it because very few have the rigor. Especially in our category, too many of the books that are published really deserve to be articles. They're brilliant articles and weak books. Yeah. There's just not enough there for 250 pages, as good as the idea may be. I know myself. I'll have ideas, and I'll say to myself, "It's a good article," So yeah, I think that like with anything, when we allow numbers to drive the decision making, then we lower the standards. We do it in recruiting, we do it in publishing, we do it in everything.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about your most recent book, Simon, The Infinite Game. But as you're talking, I'm remembering a story that I've shared many times when we first submitted draft number 1 on Team of Teams years ago. Our publisher in common, I remember it like it was yesterday, we were on a conference call with them, and they took this long pause after they digested the manuscript, and they said, "Okay, you've actually tried to write a real book here, so we're going to give you an extra 6 months because this has to be done well," which we took as a bit of a backhanded compliment, I think. But the infinite game, it just has. I mean, when we first talked about the idea years ago, as you were thinking about it, the idea for most people listening will be familiar, but the challenge organizations and leaders that think in short-term cycles, quarterly and annual, and that sort of, did we win the quarter, and now that's over, let's play another quarter, let's play the year, et cetera, versus the environment around us, which is sort of limitless in its time and scope and infinite, right? And so, and I remember when you guys first spoke about it, it was the U.S. military's positioning inside an infinite game in certain parts of the world. And so you're looking at next deployment cycle, when are we coming home? And you realize you're in an environment that they've been doing this for generations and will continue to do so. It's much deeper than time can capture.
Yeah.
That seems more timely now than ever with the pandemic this year. Have you reflected on that and how some of that thinking could help us as we map into the future?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I can't help but not. I've certainly had the time to do it. It's worth just taking 2 seconds to define the terms. It doesn't take long. Dr. James Carse in the mid-1980s proposed these definitions of finite and infinite games. Finite games are defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective. Football, baseball, conventional warfare. There's always a beginning, middle, and an end. And if there is a winner, then necessarily there has to be a loser. Then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means new players can join the game at any time. The rules are changeable, which means every player can play however they want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game or stay in the game as long as possible. We are players in infinite games every day of our lives. There's no such thing as winning global politics. There's no such thing as winning education. You can come in first in the finite amount of time you're at school. The objectives are recognized and agreed upon, and so are the metrics. It's a grade. But there's no such thing as being the winner of education. No one's declared the winner of careers. And there's definitely no such thing as winning business. But when we listen to the language of so many of our leaders, it becomes abundantly clear that they don't know the game they're in. They talk about being number one, being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? Based upon what agreed upon objectives, metrics, or timeframes. And this is a problem because when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, when we play to win in a game that has no end, there's a few predictable and consistent outcomes. The big ones include the decline of trust, cooperation, and innovation. And so when we look at the pandemic, one of the things that I found so fascinating about it is that many of the principles of how we have to change our mindset to play for the infinite game actually happen quite naturally. So, for example, one of the practices of leading with an infinite mindset is building trusting teams. And that means operating with empathy and patience and knowing how to have difficult conversations, all these skills that we rarely, if ever, teach in business, unfortunately. Just as a quick aside, I'm tired of us calling them soft skills because hard skills and soft skills, those are in opposition. No, it's hard skills and human skills. And you need both those skills to be effective at whatever job we're asking you to do. That's an aside. And so what we saw when the pandemic hit is many people in leadership positions, whether they were effective or ineffective leaders prior to the pandemic, they fell back and leaned on their natural humanity. They picked up the telephone and they called each member on their team and they said, "How are you? You doing okay? I'm worried about you. What's up? How you doing?" Well, that's just called good leadership. It doesn't take a crisis for us to do that, and I hope that habit remains. The other big one is this idea of worthy rivalry, where in a finite game, we have competitors, and competitors are there to be beaten, right? But in the infinite game, the other players in the game are not competitors, they're rivals. And some of those rivals are worthy of comparison, which means their strengths reveal to us our weaknesses. For example, when Circuit City went out of business, Best Buy didn't win the game of electronic business. Like, one of the players dropped out, but that doesn't mean you're the winner. That's my point. And what I thought was so interesting, as soon as the pandemic struck, the total number of companies that were obsessed with beating their competitors was zero. Absolutely. We stopped being obsessed with competition when the pandemic hit because we all had to just survive. And that survival mentality is an infinite mentality. Now, again, it doesn't take a crisis to be in survival mode. You can be in a survival mode, in other words, stay in the game as long as possible, in good times as well. And if you have a survival mentality in good times, it means you're going to save money, you're going to make strategic decisions that are more likely to keep you in the game longer, even if bad times strike. So that idea of just trying to stay in the game for as long as possible is ignoring beating the competition. It's not that the competition doesn't have value; they have comparative value, but they don't have competitive value. And I think when the pandemic struck, what I found so fascinating is many of these infinite instincts, they just sort of showed up. They didn't require any convincing or arm twisting for people to embrace them.
Simon, I'm fascinated by the infinite game because the concepts you outline and the way to participate in that, I'm not going to use the term compete, but to participate effectively, almost means that you go Tuesday, you're a baseball team, Wednesday, you're a football team, Thursday, you're a basketball team, and you know that next week you're going to be a number of other things as well. And just the idea that we are not locking ourselves into a certain setting. Instead, the setting is to react, to be thoughtful, to
Right.
build internal to the team is so powerful. What would you say about developing leaders for the infinite game? We've spent a long time, I know in the military, there's probably famous in the mid-19th century when the Germans created the Staff College. One of the goals they had was two officers giving exactly the same information and the same problem would come out with exactly the same answer. And today we kind of shudder at that.
Right.
But we've followed that mindset for much of our history. How do you develop people for this?
So what I think is one of the things that I like about the infinite mindset is the infinite mindset embraces the fact that it includes finite games. You know, the infinite is not the absence of finite, it's the context within which finite exists. Unfortunately, excessive amounts of finite thinking literally rejects the infinite game. And so you see this in the military all the time. You'll have very tactical senior leaders who all they care about is winning, 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 but you're not always at war. And there's a point at which you have to, and you hear it as well, you have to leave this organization in better shape than you found it. That's an infinite concept. And part of embracing an infinite mindset is just being able to recognize the game you're in the moment you're in the game. If you're in a conventional war where there will be a winner or a loser and the objectives are agreed upon and the metrics are understood, then of course you fight to win, of course. But writ large, the organization that you're helping to run, that there is no winning and losing, and to pit the sister forces against each other, is madness. And they do this unfortunately in budget and other things like that. What I think is so interesting, and I learned this from Dr. Kars. I had the opportunity to sit down with him and meet him before he died. He died very recently, and one of the things he taught me that's actually not in the book is finite-mindedness. All of the thinking is done in the past. And the opportunity there is to mitigate or avoid surprise, because finite-minded play, you fear surprise and you fear uncertainty. And so you see this in very many finite constructions. So athletes, they practice. Soldiers train so that they are not surprised. So they are prepared for as many eventualities as possible. And you hear them actually say it in their language. I didn't have to think, I just relied on my training, right? The training kicked in. They talk about it, right? So all the thinking is done in the past. There is no thinking that happens at the moment of uncertainty, which is why generally there's panic. Infinite-minded thinking is the total opposite. Infinite-minded thinkers embrace uncertainty and believe there is opportunity in uncertainty. They love a surprise because thinking begins now. And so conventional forces, if we want to continue with the military analogy, there's a lot of finite thinking and a lot of training. We want them to just sort of mitigate surprise. And if you look at the soft community, the special operators, one of the things that you teach the special operators is creativity. Because the inherent in their job is much more uncertainty. And so you look for, and this is where I think the huge misunderstanding, you guys know a lot better than I do, the huge misunderstanding from the general public, soft forces are not just guerrillas. They're not just, burly, big. There's mass amounts of brain power and creativity and thinking that goes along with being a special operator. And it's understanding and knowing when to use each and both. Especially if you have somebody who is in a position of authority, who has the ability to enjoy and appreciate surprise. And I think that's one of the things we can do a lot better doing teaching, which is instead of fearing surprise, to love surprise, that creativity happens in chaos.
Yeah, well said.
Do you think that can, or do you see that trickling into academia?
Say again, Chris, we lost you there.
Or certainly in the soft community.
Say it again, I lost you.
Sorry. Is that trickling into the academia in your experience?
I'm not qualified to comment on academia. I don't sit in academia. I think that what we do know in the business world and military, I think even military, the modern military is taking itself on in a way that in the 10 years that I've had a relationship with the military is definitely different. You have people in senior leadership now saying they're questioning everything the way the military has done things. They don't always have all the solutions, but they're starting to say, if we don't have an answer for why are we doing this, it should at least be on the table to be questioned. And if we're okay with that, that's fine, but let us know the reason. And I think that's very sophisticated thinking. We're starting to see the questions being asked in business as well, but I think a lot of business leaders are a little bit lost as to what to do next. They know there's a lot of pressure from the outside world, and there's a lot of pressure from the younger employees in their organization. Unfortunately, they've risen through the ranks during the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, where finite-minded thinking was quite frankly perfected. We idolized people like Jack Welch, who entitled one of his books "Winning" and put his own picture on the cover. And I think we're looking back at the 80s and 90s and 2000s and saying, I think we over-indexed on rugged individualism and individual performance and short-termism, that it's done actually significant damage to the longevity of our companies, the health of our economies, and quite frankly, the mental health of our employees. And so the questions are being asked, and I think it's one of the reasons our work has relevance in the world today. People are turning to thinking like ours and others, looking for solutions. But I still think that it's very much in flux, and it's still a little bit of the Wild West.
Great. I'm going to take a slightly different turn here, Simon. You talked about lowering standards for recruiting. Well, I was admitted into West Point in 1972, and famously, that was the easiest year in the Academy's history to be accepted. And so here I am. So I put that backdrop against it. If you were 30, 40 years in the future, call it 2050, and you were looking back at leaders now, how do you think they will describe us?
I hope unfavorably. Like I said, I think we have created so many institutions and so many practices that are almost entirely based on finite thinking. The use of mass layoffs to balance the books on a regular basis. Our company's profitable, just not as profitable as we predicted. So we're gonna tell a bunch of people to go home and tell their families they no longer have a job. Did not exist in the United States prior to the 1980s. And yet now every single one of us has either been, or at least knows one person who has been laid off through no fault of their own. It wasn't a meritocracy. The idea of making a shareholder, a disinterested external constituent, the primary beneficiary of our decision-making, which is the same as a coach trying to build a great team by asking the fans what they want rather than asking the players what they need. But that's how we run our businesses these days. And the folly of it is, it's a big open secret. Every C-level executive of every public company does not have nice things to say about Wall Street. None of them. Every single one of them knows that they're regularly put in a position where they're forced to make decisions that they know are bad for their companies, or avoid making decisions that they know are good for their companies. I mean, it's a big open secret. That's the world we live in. And so what I hope is that we rebalance the equation. I don't actually have a problem with finite-minded thinking. I just wish people would stop dressing it up as something else. I don't have a problem with a company who's obsessed with shareholder supremacy at the expense of their employees or their customers or the quality of their product. Just say so. Stop putting purpose statements on your website when you actually have no intention of using that purpose to guide any decision inside the organization. Because at least then I, as an employee, customer, or shareholder, get to make an educated decision about where I want to work, where I want to buy from, and where I want to invest. And I will freely recognize that the finite-minded organization, I'm either working there, buying from you, or investing in you for a short-term gain. It's a perfectly legitimate transaction. But don't pretend to me that I can have a long, illustrious, wonderful, loving career here when you have no intention of allowing me to prove myself and allow it to be a meritocracy. I just want a little more honesty.
I love it.
Simon, just a closing point. Can you a little bit about habits of leaders that you see universally, where you say, yeah, these are the things that I consistently see amongst the type of leaders that I think others want to follow and that I would recommend as leaders to others?
I have two different ways of skinning this cat. The first is and we all get asked this question a lot. What are your morning habits? As if any of us copying each other's habits is going to, profoundly change the way we lead. The reality is there's different personalities. And it's good to ask these questions, don't get me wrong, but we have to filter them through, is this person like me? So for example, I'm not disciplined. I'm the furthest thing from disciplined. And so the kind of advice that I will dispense about some of my habits or the things that work for me may work for somebody who is also a little more sort of enjoys chaos, a little more of a creative personality, then things will work for you. If you're a little more if you're a discipline, if you like structure, if you're a list keeper, then people who dispense advice who are more like you, then my point is there's no one size fits all. And I think it's very important for us to assess who we are and how we operate in the world, and then try and learn from people who are similar to us. Because for me to try and follow the advice of somebody who's not like me will actually make me insecure and make me feel worse. Because I can't do what they do. I can't do it, So that's number one, which is filter ask for lots of advice, read lots of books, watch lots of talks, and filter it through what works for you. That's number one. That also goes into reassessing the concept of strength and weakness. One of the things that I've learned from embracing the infinite mindset is I've stopped talking about strengths and weaknesses because it's all contextual. So we're so used to saying, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Build on your strengths, mitigate. But the answer is, it depends. So for example, I'm disorganized chronically. And I remember, I used to say this is one of my big weaknesses. And one of my big weaknesses is I'm disorganized, and it would cause me stress. And I try and come up with all of these new systems to be organized. And it caused me great shame and insecurity. I remember back early when I was a young entrepreneur, I had a new business. I was living hand to fist, paycheck to paycheck, needed every client I could get. And I went to a networking event, and a guy said, "You're great. You're fantastic. I want to hire you. Here's my business card. Let's make this happen." And if I was organized, I would have texted him from the taxi on the way home, or at least emailed him the next day, but I lost the business card. And so about 2 weeks later, I found the business card at the bottom of a bag covered in dust bunnies. And I emailed the guy and said, "Hey, remember we met 2 weeks ago. I'd love to reconnect." And he wanted to work with me more because he thought I was busy. So is being disorganized a strength or a weakness? The answer is, it depends. In that case, it gave him the impression that I was either more confident or busier than I actually was. Really, really helpful. As opposed to emailing the next minute where I might have looked desperate or insecure. So the answer is, it depends. We have characteristics and qualities, and it's the context which will determine whether they're strengths or weaknesses. So I've gotten much better at assessing the context. But to answer your question in a way that's probably what you're seeking, there's only really two qualities that I'm comfortable saying all the leaders that I admire have. Vision, charisma. No, I know some amazing leaders who aren't big, visionary, Steve Jobs kind of guys. I know some remarkable leaders who don't have the traditional definition of charisma. They're kind of quiet and to themselves. But the two things that I think all of these remarkable leaders have is courage and integrity. They do the thing that's the right thing to do, even if it goes against their own self-interest, because it's the right thing to do. And they have the courage to do it. Because the pressures on almost every leader and almost every discipline are overwhelmingly finite. Making short-term gains, winning, getting something, getting promoted, whether it's, the pressures are overwhelming. And the courage to stand in integrity, the courage to do the right thing, the courage to speak truth to power, the courage to think differently, the courage to embrace an infinite mindset in a finite world. For example, like that's the quality I admire more than any other.
Wow. Simon, I was going to pivot to a question that said, what's the difference between character and habits? Get up every morning, make your bed. A good friend of mine wrote an amazing book about make your bed, Bill McCraven, and I do. My wife hates it when she's still in it. But I freely admit I'm a habit-driven sort of discipline guy. I keep lists, do all those kinds of things. But I think you just described that character is different than habits.
Yeah. You and I have different habits. But one of the reasons we get along, and we could say that for all three of us, one of the reasons we get along is because our values are similar. And we believe in things like character. We believe in things like honor. Honor is one of those words that is used very freely in the military, but it's really not used anywhere else. Yeah. Someone who is acting with honor, that company acted honorably. And I think one of the reasons we get along is because we admire each other's character. And this is the value of a team, which is you don't want me to be like you, because then I'm going to solve all of your problems like you, and you don't need me. What makes us valuable as partners in a team is that we have entirely different ways. And sometimes your way is the better way. Sometimes my way is the better way. And sometimes something in between is the better way. And it's not the right or wrong. It's actually the tension. And when I evaluate companies, for example, I always look for partnership. I'm very scared of companies that are run by one big personality because that means they solve problems one way. I like the tension of the visionary and the operator. I like the tension of the creative and the structure. And there is push me, pull you, and they do drive each other nuts. But the reason that it works is because they love each other and they respect each other and they know how to fight well together. And they both know when is the right time to back down. So I think character, habit works if, like I said, if we share the same personality, but it's the character of the team that I think is much more fundamental.
Yeah, it's amazing. You just described the leadership of McChrystal Group. We're always knocking heads and wrestling, but we love each other, and I think it works out better. The question people ask me most is this thing about me eating one meal a day. And they always think it's some Zen thing that if they follow that, they will find inner consciousness or something. And the reality is 40 years ago, I stopped eating 2 meals a day because I thought I was getting fat. And now it's just a habit. And so, it's one of those things that you're exactly right. Sometimes people got to understand the purpose, but the purpose of having you on today was to make us all smarter, to make us all wiser, to make us all think more. And you have done that in spades. And so my purpose now is to express my affection and gratitude to you for everything you do, everything you write and say, but also for sharing your time with us today.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I'm so grateful. You always challenge me and ask me questions that I haven't thought about before. And so you open up new frontiers for me, which I so appreciate. And such an honor for me and a treat to have a platform, to have your platform to share my ideas. So thank you very, very much. I'm really grateful.
Perfect. Now, go home and make your bed, right?
Yeah, funny story. You know, I'm one of those kids that I never made my bed. I got in trouble from my parents to make my bed, and then even when I left home, you know, in college, never made my bed. And the first time, ever since I got my own apartment that I chose and I paid the rent for, and it was entirely mine, that I decorated with no help from anybody, I have made my bed every single morning since, and I've never missed a day.
I love it.
Isn't that funny? But when I travel and I stay like in a hotel or in a friend's house, like in the guest house, in the guest room, for example, I don't make my bed. So it's not the bed, it's the pride of the home. You know, it's very funny.
That's perfect. Well, thanks again, Simon, and you take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. Great discussion.
That was really good.
Oh, I didn't think that story was on the record, but that's fine.
It's out there. You'll never get another invitation to stay with anybody again.
Exactly.
Except me. No, I thought it was, I'm not going to lie. I think The Infinite Game is such a perfect capture of, well, I speak from the military standpoint, what the military needs to think about.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's opposite the way we do.
It's so true. And again, it's not either or. It's knowing when to, like, so there are finite wars that the military engages in, and they're traditionally fought by the Army and the Marine Corps.
Right.
You know, you go in, you seize an objective, and then you come home. But unfortunately, we also are engaged in infinite war. Cold War is an example, and we're just in Cold War 2.0 now. And unfortunately, when we don't articulate a finite war based on the finite definitions, which is what is the known objective, what is the known metric, and what is the endpoint at which we return home, we have instances like Iraq and Afghanistan where we find ourselves in an infinite war where we never should have in the first place. It's because we screwed up the definitions.
That's right. Or we sitting around wait till war starts. Well, war's already started with Russia.
Right. Exactly right. Exactly.
They know it.
Not all war is hot.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can talk for hours about it.
Zach, you take care. Look forward to seeing you.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.
What jumped out at me from the discussion was sort of the going all the way back to start with why stuff, which as you and I have gotten to know him over the years, you know, he was having that discussion for 10 years before, somewhere around there, before the book ever came out. And he did that little TEDx talk that got a ton of traction. But he would be the first to say, I think, like, he didn't know that TED talk was going to be the thing that captured it for audiences. But then the progression into where he is now around long-term versus near-term thinking, infinite game thinking, did jump out at me, because I think that was one of my takeaways from the discussion was, I think on the backside of this year in particular, people are going to rediscover the deeper purpose behind even the trivial. You know, meeting a friend for a coffee is going to be, you know, like your honeymoon once was. So I think it's going to, and that hopefully would trickle up at organizations as well.
You know, it was interesting when he was talking, it reminded me something when I was a captain, there was this resurgence of the idea of commander's intent in the Army. And what they did was, before that, you'd gotten mission statements that told you what to do and when to do it and how to achieve it. But the commander's intent told you why you were doing it. And the concept was, I'm telling you to do this, but the overall purpose is this. So if conditions change, or if you figure out a better way, as long as you achieve this purpose, then that's good. And it was a renaissance of thinking in the U.S. Army, and it pushed us from fairly tactical thinking of following specific instructions to following ideas. And it wasn't done imperfectly, but when Simon talks about, you know, the infinite game, it's almost like, why am I working hard to get promoted, to make money, to do whatever? And then you ask the next question, well, what would I do with the money? Why would the promotion really matter to me? You know, I'm 66 now, and I ask that question. All right, you work hard. And what was that about?
Yeah. No, I send his, I'm sure you do, obviously, a different level of folks getting out of the military. Probably every 3 weeks or so, I have a call with somebody that's getting out. It tends to be, you know, in the 12 to 20 year range. And I'm sure you're, you know, 25 to 35 year range.
And Simon's stuff is one of the things I push to people to read. Most people have read it at this point, but I send that sort of a clip around the why stuff. And I always send C.S. Lewis's Inner Ring. But it's to get people to that core idea. And in a follow-up conversation with the guys, I'll always say, is your goal to be rich? Because you'll be rich, right? You work hard, you're super talented. It'll take you 10, 15 years, however much. So imagine you're rich, whatever that means to you. What are you going to do with it? And that it's interesting because folks that haven't really thought about that. Like they think the hard part's going to be making money. Like, no, you'll make money. I mean, depends how much you want to sell your soul. You'll make money. But then what do you do with it?
You'll remember when we were in Iraq, and it was not long after I'd taken over JSOC, and we had this big exodus of operators from SEAL Team 6 and from Delta Force going to Blackwater and equivalent. And they were making a bunch of money. And we thought, this is going to destroy our units because they will just suck all our talent away. And it lasted for, 9 months or a year. And then suddenly it stopped. We couldn't compete with the money Blackwater was giving. But what happened was that first tranche of people who went out came back and told their buddies, they said, it's not the same. You're not fighting along, comrades, for the same feeling. You don't get the same sense of satisfaction, and the money doesn't make up for the difference.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's really interesting to look back at that. And having never obviously served in any of the sort of contractor space personally, you wonder why, if it's 6 operators in a safe house somewhere, the difference between the cohesiveness, those same 6 people in a cohesive military unit versus a contracting unit. I've never put my finger on the exact thing that makes it that much different. I'd expect it to be 30% different, but it's like 180 when you get inside it. And it's a really interesting thing that comes down to the deeper sense of, the closest I can get to is we are all here knowing we could be other places. And where on the contractor side, you're kind of saying, we're here kind of for the money. And we're going to build on that, which is an unstable foundation.
Yeah, if you extrapolate that to almost any business or venture where people are trying to build a team to do something, if they can't settle upon a narrative that affects them, not just that they communicate to the world, but a narrative that gives them purpose, it's really hard to justify a lot of what we do. Because otherwise it would be simply transactional and you'd be making decisions. Do I want to go stand out in the rain and the snow for this amount of money per hour? And if you have to, you'll do that. But your purpose is probably for your family at that point.
Yeah. One other thing that jumped out at me was right towards the end of the discussion with Simon, we were talking about so I threw the habits question at him just because I wanted to tease out his reaction, because I know he's not a big believer in that. And the effort to replicate the habits of other leaders. And you see this all the time in the military and certainly in industry, people taking on the character of senior folks. And rather than taking on the habits of senior folks, rather than really trying to understand their character. And I remember after being your aide in 2008, 2009, going to grad school, and lots of the SOF officers really trying to understand, hey, what makes McChrystal tick? Like, let's talk about this 1 meal a day thing. And I was very frank with guys. I'm like, he eats 1 meal a day because he used to eat a lot more and he was gaining weight, and he just got into a habit of eating 1 meal a day. Like, he's not a Spartan and he doesn't encourage anybody else to do it. And honestly, I'd spent a year with you. I knew that to be true. And guys would look at me and say, no, that's not right. I'm like, okay, like, I'm just telling you, he sleeps 4 hours a day because he's really stressed. It's really hard to run a global war on terror. He'd probably sleep 5 or 6 if he could keep his head down. And people just want to believe there's something different there when they see habit.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And if you watch people who develop bad habits, and I've been watching the political environment for the last year or so, and you see habits in politicians that you used to respect, and they become more crass or whatever, more reactive. And to a degree, that becomes habit of an environment that they have adapted to. And you almost want to pull them back and say, let's go back to the reason why you got into politics, what you're trying to do, what do you want to tell your grandkids later. But I think habits are that two-edged sword. If you get good ones and they reflect your values, then they're extraordinarily good because you don't have to think about doing the right thing. But if you get bad ones, the same is true.
Yeah. I often heard you've said this many times over the years about you never, I'll get it slightly wrong, but you never saw your dad break a rule or something to that extent.
That's right.
Which is just a way of living. And I'm guessing, I never met your father, but I'm guessing he never did that with the intent of setting an example that you would follow. That's just who he was. That's a character trait.
I never saw him treat anyone discourteously. I never saw him break a rule. I never saw him park where you shouldn't park. And he was a very successful combat commander. So he's the kind of guy you think of as sort of freewheeling and whatnot. But in reality, he set a number of rules for himself in life that he just adhered to automatically. And I think they were a tremendous example for all of his kids.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a worthy, I mean, you could spend a lot of time on the topic, but trying to differentiate between, am I impersonating the way that person carries themselves, the way their diction, or am I trying to understand their core character of courtesy to others? So as one example. So
the thing I wanted to raise was the thing you started in our Yale class, and that was the idea of somebody writing a letter to their future selves, whether it's 5 years in the future or however far in the future you want to make people do it, because it connects a lot to what Simon said, both the reason why and the infinite game. Because if you are writing a letter to you in the future and you see yourselves as being in a certain place, hopefully that's where you want to be. And hopefully you've thought about, okay, if I do all of these things to get to that place, what does that mean for me? What does that mean about me? Am I really going to be satisfied and happy with that particular set of circumstances? And the problem is you only go through life once. And so you set an azimuth, and if you get it wrong, it's frightening to change it, but it's necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I that's a good reminder. We should bring that back in the spring. I have not found a better way to have discussions with younger folks than me to help them sort of explore where they want to, how they want to plan to get to the next ridgeline. I think 5 years is a good number because it's far enough out that it's pretty uncertain, but it also sets some sort of time-bound rules where you say, okay, in 5 years you want to be married, have a child, live in a different city, and have a different job. Like, the odds of doing all of that in 5 years are pretty low. So let's prioritize them. Let's think it through. Are you weighting the variables correctly? That sort of thing. So it really is a good exercise. And I found you and I doing it for the class every year was a great forcing function for me personally as well.
Yeah, I had them once in a discussion do their obituary, and it kind of freaked them out because I think some of them didn't realize that at some point somebody was in fact going to write their obituary. But
right.
The idea of thinking about the future is just so powerful.
It is. Well, it was a great discussion. He was a great guest and also a great friend. So we appreciate him being on.
Absolutely.
Okay, as I said, just a great discussion with one of the most thoughtful folks out there in the leadership space that I've ever gotten to know and now have the honor of calling a friend. Simon, to set the bar, both intellectually and in his own actions, what it means to be a leader in today's world, and then especially in extremely tumultuous times like we're all going through right now. If you've not tuned in to it before, Simon also has a podcast, A Bit of Optimism, absolutely worth listening to. He has a great way of teasing out these specific points around sort of a leader's approach with his own network of folks in the leadership and thought leadership space. So thanks for taking the time to listen to that discussion, and we look forward to seeing you next time in 2021 here at No Turning Back. Thanks to all of you that have followed us throughout the year, and we look forward to another series of great discussions in 2021, which I'm confident will be a better year for all of us. Hard to imagine it being more challenging than 2020 was. Hope you all have a restful New Year's, and we'll see you again on No Turning Back. Thanks.